The sound was a sharp, rhythmic rasp. Metal bit into the earth, skidded, and stalled. Elias pulled the shovel back, his knuckles white, and drove it down again. The ground was not soil. It was a calcified crust, baked by 3 years of relentless sun. He stood in the center of a valley that had forgotten the weight of water. The wells were hollowed-out stone pits, and the fields were nothing but gray, pulverized dust. Elias wiped a layer of grit from his eyes, his breath coming in short, dry hitches. He did not look toward the empty village houses. He knelt, pressing his palms flat against the heat radiating from the ground. It was a furnace. He picked up the shovel, the handle slick with sweat and dust, and carved a jagged line into the dirt. He was not digging for water that was there. He was carving a path for water that was not. Each scoop of earth was a deliberate, heavy effort. He threw the dirt aside, clearing a narrow trench that looked like a scar on the valley floor. The work was a slow, grinding torture. Elias drove the shovel into the rock-hard soil until his shoulders burned with every lift. He cleared stones, deepened the channel, and packed the banks with his bare hands. The skin on his palms split, leaving dark, wet stains on the dirt, but he did not stop. He worked as if the water were already rushing toward him. From the porches of the village, the neighbors watched. They stood in the shade, arms crossed, their eyes tracking his every movement with a cold, detached pity. They whispered. Their voices carried on the hot, dry breeze. He heard the low hum of their doubt, the way they shook their heads at the sight of a man wasting his strength. Elias kept his head down. He ignored the whispers, focusing instead on the alignment of the trench. He reinforced the banks with heavy rocks, his fingers raw and bleeding. He did not look up to meet their gaze. He knew what they saw, a man digging a grave for his own sanity. He knew what he was doing, bridging the gap. He pressed his weight into the shovel, carving deeper, his movements rhythmic and relentless, until the sun began to dip and the shadows stretched long. The sun hung low, a heavy, brassy weight in a cloudless sky. Elias knelt in the trench, his hands caked in dry, gray silt. He was measuring the slope, checking the alignment of the bank, when a shadow fell across his work. A traveler stood on the edge of the embankment, leaning on a worn staff. The man looked down at the empty, cracked bed, then back at Elias. "Why do you labor for a river that does not exist?" the traveler asked. The voice was thin, cutting through the stagnant air. Elias did not answer immediately. He wiped the grit from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of dirt across his skin. He stood up, his knees popping, and pointed a calloused finger toward the distant, shimmering horizon. "I am not digging for what I see," Elias replied. His voice was steady, stripped of all doubt. I am digging for what I know is coming." The traveler stared at the dry, barren trench. A strange, heavy silence settled over the valley. Elias turned back to the earth, his jaw set, and drove the shovel into the ground. The shift came with a sudden, sharp snap of air. The wind, absent for years, returned with a low, mournful howl that whipped dust into swirling funnels. Elias stood in the center of his trench, his feet planted wide. He looked up. The horizon, once a flat, brassy line, was now choked with bruised, purple clouds. They moved with a predatory speed, swallowing the light. The temperature plummeted. A single, heavy drop struck the dry earth, leaving a dark, cratered mark. Then another. Then 1,000. The sky broke open in a violent, gray curtain. Within seconds, the dust turned to slick, dark mud. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, growing into a deafening roar. From the high slopes, a wall of water crested the ridge. It did not scatter. It found the mouth of the trench, surging into the channel with a force that shook the very banks Elias had reinforced. The water churned, foaming as it rushed through the valley, carving a path of life into the dead soil. Elias did not move. He watched the water rise, swirling around his boots, filling the deep, carved earth exactly as he had calculated. The villagers, once silent in their skepticism, now crowded their windows, their faces pale as they witnessed the impossible river. The water surged past his knees, cold and heavy with the silt of the mountains. Elias reached down, cupping the flow in his calloused palms, and let it spill over his wrists. The ache in his muscles finally faded, replaced by the steady, rhythmic pulse of the current. He looked toward the fields. The dry, cracked earth was darkening, drinking deep as the water seeped into the thirsty roots. He had spent months digging into the silence, ignoring the doubt of the valley, and now the silence was gone. He stood in the center of the life he had prepared for. Faith had not been a passive wait for the storm. It was the shovel in his hand, the reinforced bank, the path carved into the dust. He had built the vessel, and now the vessel was full. The gap between the unseen promise and the visible reality had vanished. Elias stood still, watching the valley transform, his work complete.